Hi students, this is Mrs. Mignell with the second part of the critical reading response, the Precis statement. Why write a Precis statement? Well, as you are researching and reading your academically credible sources for your papers, a Precis statement helps you to have read the source well, to ensure that you understand what the source has said, helps you to remember the author and what he or she has said, and helps you evaluate how well the author evidences his or her point. There are actually 4 sentences in a Precis statement. The first one is the summary. The second one is a summary of evidence, which includes the kind of evidence along with some details, the author's motivation and intent for writing the article, as well as who the audience is that the author wrote to. You will only be required to write sentences A and B. Now here is an example of a Precis statement. I have the instructions as well as an example, and I'm not going to read them to you. So go ahead and pause this video and read the instructions and then read the example. Many students do not notice that they have to use only Precis terminology. So you are only going to use the verbs of claims or asserts or argues or proposes, and proposes only goes if you're going to point out the solutions to a problem that the author has provided in their article. I want to remind students that the first sentence here identifies the author's point or thesis and not a fact that the author brings up in supporting his or her point. For example, children are being abused in border detention centers is a fact. The opinion would be the abuse children suffer in border detention centers will have lifelong consequences of, then you would fill that in, and that opinion requires the writer to prove that this abuse will result in these consequences. Precis statement, sentence B, identifies the kind of evidence the author used in support of his or her point, aka thesis statement. Now, I want to point out that kind means intuition, personal experience, case examples, testimonies, appeals to authority, personal observation, research studies, questionnaires, surveys, analogies, and statistics, with some details that you can remember some specifics about the kind of evidence that the author used. And here is an example of the Precis statement B for Petrash, which go ahead and pause and go ahead and read the sentence B. So here again, I remind you that you do need to be able to identify the kind of evidence that the author used of. And I do point out that sentence B does allow for you to consider whether the evidence the author used is credible. For example, if an author only uses intuition and personal testimony, then you would think, gee, that really isn't that credible if they're trying to claim something. Rather than something like Corbett did, she did use personal testimony, but she gave a number of personal testimonies, including her own, which was better quality than if she would have just had one person's experience. So if you do find that your source does not have quality evidence, you should stop and find another source, because that source is not credible enough to be placed into an academic essay. So now is your chance to pause the video and practice. Take out your article that you wrote your works cited page citation on, and go ahead and replay this video so that you can write the Precis statement sentences A and B on your article. Wonderful. So now you have completed part one and written a works cited citation on one source, and you have completed part two by writing sentences A and B for a Precis statement on that same source. So now, what questions do you have about the Precis statement? Remember, I've created that discussion board that you can go to and you can ask some questions, but I do ask that you have paused the video and you have attempted to try and write the Precis statement, because then at least you could post that Precis statement and ask a question. That concludes the second part of the critical reading response on the Precis statement.